His presidency. Let's bring one of the reporters behind Friday's NBC News exclusive report, NBC News National Security and Military Report, Courtney Kube. And Courtney, this is one of those situations where the president's lies and half-truths or exaggerations could come to a head, because we have never seen something like this on the national or international stage, where you're dealing with a dictator. And we have a president of the United States who bends the truth on a daily basis. So the concern is that he will say that reports like the one you all came with out on Friday are untrue. What can you tell us about the work that has been done to put into getting the background on this story?
So there were a couple of things, Mika. I mean, for starters, we're never surprised when the president says that one of our stories isn't true anymore. Unfortunately, it happens. I can tell you that this was days of extensive reporting by my colleagues Ken Delaney and Carol Lee and I. And we revealed a bunch of things that, actually haven't even gotten as much attention as they were fascinating to me during the course of this reporting. One of them was that the U.S. intelligence has really stepped up its gathering on North Korea. And one of the intelligence officials we spoke with said that it's paid dividends. You've been talking here about this declaration that the U.S. is expecting, hoping to get this week from North Korea. That was something that we spoke about as well. One of the reasons that this whole deceit that the U.S. is now confident that North Korea is engaging in is so critical is that when North Korea hands over this declaration that will include presumably all of their nuclear facilities, their missile facilities, the full scope and extent of their nuclear and missile program, the U.S. was expecting to look at that and see how serious North Korea is in this denuclearization, how serious they are about being open and transparent and really engaging in a full denuclearization, which we heard President Trump come out of the Singapore summit extolling and saying how this is the beginning of the full denuclearization. But as Richard Haass said, he came out and it seems that the President Trump really oversold what is happening here. We learned from U.S. intelligence officials, from about a dozen people who we spoke with over the course of last week, that in fact North Korea has not been decreasing its enrichment of uranium, but has actually increased it at least one facility, and that they are already actively trying to deceive the United States. So here we are just days out of the summit, and the U.S. is already confident that North Korea is not upholding its end of the bargain.
All right, NBC's Courtney Kube, thank you so much for your reporting.
So, and by the way, Casey Hunt, you also have the Wall Street Journal reporting regarding the missile technology and the missile facilities, the expansion there. So if Donald Trump's talking about fake news, then he'll have to talk about Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal as fake news. Where are the Republicans on this?
They must be very concerned.
On Capitol Hill. I mean, this is a guy who told us we didn't have to worry about nuclear facilities, Donald Trump, and here we are a couple of weeks later. We find out that they've increased, not decreased, uranium enrichment, and they are continuing to try to hide from us the continued development of missile technology that puts the continental United States at risk.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, he didn't just tweet here, right? I mean, this wasn't just a case of the president saying, oh, everything's fine, and leaving it at that. He actually canceled our military exercises with South Korea, which, at the time had a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill pretty incensed. And there was, a lunch behind closed doors with the vice president. Several senators came out after the lunch and said, oh, no, the vice president assured us that we have not taken this pretty dramatic step, given away this significant concession to the North Koreans. That didn't happen. Then it turns out, well, somebody got their wires crossed, and everyone was out there correcting their statements afterwards and saying, well, actually, we did give that concession away. And, I'm trying to think of an example of something that the North Koreans gave away. It seems...
Actually, you couldn't do that because, and I'm serious, the North Koreans gave away nothing. They got the greatest propaganda win in the history of their regime.
And I think that the sense on the Hill was that it was a mistake to end those exercises. I think people are biting their tongues partly because, a lot of these members, they're seeing, especially senators on the Intelligence Committee, they're seeing information that we're not privy to. And quite frankly, I think there was a very serious fear that we were on that track to war that David Ignatius was talking about, that a year ago, things were really, really dramatically terrible. And people did want to give this president at least the chance to put us on a different footing. Now, we'll see if what we have learned from this reporting ultimately leads people to be even more concerned than they already are.
You know what, though, Richard? This sounds so much like what the Obama administration told us about the Iran deal. I was against the Iran deal. If you're against the Iran deal, they go, "Oh, you want nuclear war with Iran?" There was no middle ground. You either supported a stupid deal with Iran, in my opinion, or they said you were for nuclear war. Now what we're hearing is, oh, well, things were so horrible. This beats San Francisco being reduced to thermonuclear ashes. Well, actually, there's a middle ground between that. You could actually prepare for talks, bilateral talks with, or actually, oh my God, work to bring in other countries. And you could actually begin a process that actually moved us down the road where the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, could later meet with the North Koreans after we already know that they're going to be giving us something instead of cheating and lying to us as they have for the past quarter century.
There's all that, plus two other things. One is that this agreement is so ambitious in the sense that it's all or nothing, that we have got to denuclearize, get rid of everything North Korea has. If that's the only definition of successful diplomacy, we have set the standard so high, it is wildly unrealistic that North Korea would ever agree to it. Secondly, what Casey was saying, the idea that we introduced unilaterally, without coordinating it with South Korea or Japan, that we're going to stop all of our exercises, plus the president threw out at the press conference the possibility of withdrawing all U.S. forces from South Korea. And even if this agreement had been ironclad, guess what, Joe? One thing never mentioned in the agreement was North Korean conventional military threat to South Korea. So it's so unwarranted that we have gone this route. So we have basically given up something truly for nothing here.
Which is the stupidity, is the geostrategic stupidity is absolutely staggering. And the president now, and we're going to talk about this next block, but the president, Mika, talking about taking our troops out of South Korea. The president floating the idea of taking our troops out of Germany while Russia is expanding westward. And then talking about recognizing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Of course, he wouldn't remember because he doesn't read and he doesn't know history. He would not remember this because actually you can't remember something you never knew. But we actually had a treaty with Ukraine. And we told them, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we will make sure that your boundaries are secure from invasion.
Right. So
now Donald Trump is going to say, or he's at least floating the idea of recognizing Russia's invasion of the Ukraine.
So we have the geostrategic stupidity roulette wheel. And that's part of it. WTO, Crimea, Mexico, elections. There's so many different options.
Taking troops out of Germany, taking troops out of South Korea. He's going to be saying we need to take troops out of, everywhere, you name it.
Well,
but we do need to send a lot of troops and build a wall at the border because there is a negative immigration flow from the United States to Mexico. That makes sense.
It all makes no sense, but
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.